What defines a person's worth? Is it the car they drive? The house they live in? Or maybe the clothes they wear? We pass judgment all the time, drawing invisible lines between who deserves our respect and who earns our contempt. But what if I told you that sometimes the most extraordinary story hides behind the most ordinary appearance? Today, you'll hear the story of a man the world decided to forget, but who held a secret so powerful it could silence an entire crowd. Brace yourself, because what you're about to hear might just change the way you see the world forever. It was a crisp autumn morning in Boston, and the Daily Grind, a trendy artisanal coffee shop, was buzzing with the energy of a city waking up. The air was thick with the rich aroma of freshly ground coffee beans and buttery croissants, a comforting scent for the young professionals and students typing away on their laptops. Sunlight streamed through the large front window, illuminating the polished wooden tables and the vibrant chatter of customers ordering lattes with oat milk and avocado toast. It was a picture of modern urban comfort, a sanctuary for some, but not for all. Standing at the entrance, a man whose clothes were frayed and whose face was etched with the harsh lines of time and cold nights watched the scene in silence. His name was Arthur, and his presence was an immediate disruption to the carefully curated atmosphere. As he stepped inside with a hesitant gait, a few customers frowned, their expressions hardening as if his very existence was an inconvenience. The lively chatter dipped for a moment, replaced by a wave of unspoken judgment. With the humility of someone long accustomed to being overlooked, Arthur approached the counter. His calloused hands trembled slightly, not from weakness, but from the cold that had settled deep in his bones. He didn't ask for much. His voice, when he spoke, was a low, almost melodic whisper, yet it carried a weight of profound weariness. "Excuse me," he said to the young barista, "could I please have just a plain bagel?" The barista, a young woman named Jessica with sharp eyes and a cynical smirk, looked him up and down with unconcealed disdain. "Just a plain one?" she asked, her tone dripping with sarcasm. A few customers in line snickered. Arthur simply nodded, his gaze fixed on the counter. He knew that any response would only fuel the fire of her contempt. Silence had become his shield. The contrast was brutal. While patrons indulged in elaborate coffees and pastries, he asked only for the bare minimum to quiet the gnawing hunger in his stomach. Mr. Peterson, the owner, watched from his small office in the back, his brow furrowed with a familiar mix of concern for his business and a flicker of curiosity about the man who stood so calmly amidst the silent scorn. Jessica didn't miss the chance to escalate the humiliation. "Don't you have any shame coming in here looking like that?" she announced, her voice loud enough to capture the attention of the entire cafe. The snickers from the line erupted into open laughter, a wave of derision washing over the room. The weight of it was suffocating, but Arthur took a slow, deep breath, refusing to let his composure break. His eyes fell to the worn-out toes of his shoes, as if seeking refuge on the floor. He had faced mockery before, countless times, but the sting of it never truly faded. Cruel murmurs rippled through the crowd. "Probably just wants a handout," one man whispered to his friend. "People like that ruin the vibe of a place," another added. The judgment was swift and merciless, each word a stone cast in his direction. Yet Arthur endured it all in a profound silence that seemed to unnerve them more than any outburst would have. Behind the counter, Mr. Peterson's frown deepened. This wasn't just a customer being rude, it was a public spectacle, and it was happening in his establishment. With a theatrical sigh, Jessica grabbed a bagel from the day-old basket, one that was visibly hard and stale. "Here," she said, practically throwing it on the counter. "Something to match your look." The cruel remark was met with a smattering of sarcastic applause from a group of college students near the front. Arthur picked up the bagel, his movements deliberate and graceful. "Thank you, miss. God bless," he said softly, his voice unwavering. The earnestness of his blessing was met with another derisive laugh from Jessica, as if his words were the punchline to a joke she had crafted. As Arthur turned and walked slowly toward the door, the sounds of the cafe, The clinking of spoons, the hiss of the espresso machine, seemed to fade into a dull roar in his mind. The only thing that felt real was the sharp pain of being treated as less than human. A few patrons watched him leave, their gazes cold and dismissive. To them, he was just a nuisance who had finally been dealt with. But as he reached the door, Arthur glanced back one last time. There was no anger in his eyes, only a quiet, unshakable dignity. It was a look that said, "You have no idea who I am." And that look did not escape Mr. Peterson. After Arthur left, a strange and heavy silence descended upon the daily grind. The sharp echoes of laughter had dissipated, but in their place, a thick, uncomfortable atmosphere settled over the room. It was as if the very air had become stale with the residue of collective guilt. Customers who had been amused just moments before now found their gazes fixed on their coffee cups or the glowing screens of their laptops, suddenly desperate to find a distraction. The vibrant, cheerful energy of the morning had been irrevocably broken, replaced by a shared, unspoken shame. Mr. Peterson emerged from his small office in the back, his face a mask of grim disapproval. He walked directly to the counter, where Jessica was wiping it down with a defiant energy, her posture challenging anyone to question her actions. "That was uncalled for, Jessica," Mr. Peterson said, his voice low but carrying a firmness that cut through the quiet. She paused, her hand still, before rolling her eyes with dramatic flair. "Oh, please, Mr. P. He was scaring off the regulars. Look around, people were uncomfortable. I did you a favor." Her justification, however, sounded hollow even to her own ears. The discomfort in the room wasn't because of Arthur's presence, but because of her cruelty. Mr. Peterson didn't argue further. He simply gave her a look of deep disappointment before turning away, a look that communicated more than words ever could. Later that evening, long after the last employee had gone home, Mr. Peterson sat alone in the dim light of his office, the security footage playing on a small monitor. He wasn't looking for confirmation of what happened. He was searching for understanding. He watched the scene unfold again and again. He saw the subtle way Arthur's shoulders tensed at the first insult, yet he refused to stoop. He saw the profound patience in his stance as he waited for the stale bagel. Most of all, he replayed the moment Arthur spoke, isolating the audio. "Excuse me," and "Thank you, miss. God bless." The words were grammatically perfect, the enunciation clear and measured, almost elegant. It wasn't the slurred or broken speech of someone defeated by addiction or mental illness. It was the careful language of an educated man. A seed of doubt, small but persistent, began to sprout in the fertile ground of his guilt. Who was this man? The question became a relentless hum in the back of his mind, gnawing at him as he locked up the shop and walked home through the quiet Boston streets. He felt a growing sense of responsibility, a powerful feeling that he had been a passive witness to a profound and terrible injustice, and his inaction made him complicit. The following days were consumed by Mr. Peterson's quiet, burgeoning obsession. The image of Arthur's dignified gaze was imprinted on his mind. During his lunch breaks, he began to walk the streets around his coffee shop, a man on a mission. He started asking around, describing the quiet, well-spoken homeless man to other local business owners. Most just offered a shrug, their faces reflecting an unfortunate urban indifference, accustomed to the anonymous, transient faces of the city's forgotten population. "They come and go," a dry cleaner told him. "You stop seeing them after a while." But Mr. Peterson refused to stop seeing. He pressed on, his quest feeling more urgent with each dead end. His breakthrough came from an unlikely source. He stepped into an old, dusty bookstore, a relic from a bygone era, tucked between a vape shop and a yoga studio. The owner, an elderly man with glasses perched on the end of his nose, listened intently to the description. A flicker of recognition crossed his face. "Ah, you must mean the professor," he said, his voice raspy with age. "He's been around for a few years now. Doesn't cause any trouble. Mostly keeps to himself, reading discarded books by the river. You can tell he's not like the others. There's a deep sadness there. The word professor electrified Mr. Peterson. It was the missing piece, the clue that validated the nagging feeling in his gut. That night, armed with this vital new piece of information, he sat at his home computer, his determination renewed. He bypassed the broad, fruitless searches from before and went straight to the digital archives of Boston's most prestigious universities. He focused his search on Harvard, typing in keywords like professor, literature, and leave of absence. For hours, he sifted through a digital haystack of academic journals, faculty announcements, and campus news articles, his eyes growing heavy from the screen's glare. Just as he was about to succumb to exhaustion, he found it. It was an article from the Harvard Gazette, dated nearly a decade ago. It featured a crisp, black-and-white photograph of a smiling, confident man in a tweed jacket, his eyes bright with intelligence as he accepted an award for excellence in teaching. The caption beneath the image read, "Dr. Arthur Pendleton, esteemed professor of classic literature, celebrated for his inspiring work with students." Mr. Peterson's heart hammered against his ribs. The man in the photo was younger, his face unlined by grief and hardship. But the eyes, they were unmistakably the same. The same deep, soulful eyes that had looked back at him in the coffee shop. He had found him. A ghost from Harvard. A brilliant mind now adrift on the merciless streets of Boston. Mr. Peterson leaned closer to the screen, his breath held tight in his chest. The man in the photograph, Dr. Arthur Pendleton, seemed to belong to another universe entirely. He clicked on the professor's name, and a cascade of links appeared. Links to published essays, glowing student reviews, and announcements for public lectures he had given on everything from Shakespeare to modern American poetry. He was, by all accounts, a titan in his field, a man who had dedicated his life to the power of words and ideas. Mr. Peterson felt a profound sense of awe, immediately followed by a chilling question. How could a man like this end up on the street asking for a simple bagel? The answer, he soon discovered, was buried in a small, overlooked news brief from a local paper, published 2 years after the award photo was taken. The headline was stark and brutal. Local family devastated by drunk driving accident. The article was short, just a few paragraphs, but its contents were heavy enough to crush a soul. It detailed a rainy Tuesday evening, a slick road, and a driver who had made the selfish choice to get behind the wheel after too many drinks. Dr. Arthur Pendleton's wife, Eleanor, a celebrated musician, and their 9-year-old daughter, Lily, were killed instantly. Arthur, who had been driving, survived with only minor physical injuries. The article ended with a sterile sentence stating that no charges were filed against him, as the other driver was found to be at fault. But Mr. Peterson knew that for a man like Arthur, this was no acquittal. He had survived while his family had not. The guilt must have been a prison more confining than any jail cell. He found a follow-up piece from a few months later, a small update noting that the esteemed professor had taken an indefinite leave of absence from Harvard, citing personal reasons. After that, the digital trail went cold. Arthur Pendleton, the brilliant academic, had simply vanished. Mr. Peterson pushed his chair back, the screech of its legs on the wooden floor echoing the turmoil in his mind. He closed his eyes, but the story was now imprinted there. He pictured Arthur, a man of intellect and passion, his world suddenly and violently shattered. He imagined the crushing silence of his home, once filled with music and a child's laughter. He could almost feel the weight of the grief, a relentless pressure that would make getting out of bed, let alone teaching a class, an impossible feat. The professorship, the accolades, the comfortable life, all of it would have turned to ash in the face of such a loss. His descent wasn't a fall from grace. It was a slow, painful surrender to a pain too immense to bear. It's in moments like these that we realize how fragile life can be and how quickly a person's world can be turned upside down. If this story is already making you think, take a moment to hit that like button. It's a small gesture, but it helps stories about empathy and understanding reach more people who need to hear them. 2 days later, the bell above the door of the Daily Grind chimed softly. Arthur stepped inside. He hadn't planned on coming back, but the gnawing hunger in his stomach had overruled the memory of his humiliation. He braced himself for the familiar sting of contempt, expecting the cold stares and whispered insults. He kept his eyes fixed on the floor, his only goal to get a piece of bread and leave as quickly as possible. But the reaction he expected never came. Instead, a calm, steady voice called his name. "Arthur." He looked up, startled. Mr. Peterson was walking towards him, not with a broom to shoo him away, but with an open, welcoming expression on his face. "Good morning," the owner said, his voice gentle. "I was hoping you'd come back." Before Arthur could process what was happening, Mr. Peterson gestured towards a small, clean table in the center of the cafe. "Please sit. Be my guest this morning." The invitation was so unexpected, so contrary to his experience, that Arthur froze. He looked around the cafe. Jessica was behind the counter, her face a mixture of confusion and apprehension. A few of the customers who had been there during the incident were present again, and their curious stares were now tinged with a palpable tension. They recognized him, and they could all sense that something was different this time. Hesitantly, Arthur allowed himself to be led to the table. The simple act of being seated, of being treated like a customer, felt foreign and overwhelming. It had been years since anyone had offered him a chair. Mr. Peterson pulled it out for him, a gesture of respect so profound it almost brought tears to Arthur's eyes. "What can I get you?" Mr. Peterson asked. "The coffee is fresh and the blueberry scones are particularly good today." Arthur was speechless. He could only manage a slight, disbelieving shake of his head. He felt the weight of every eye in the room on him. The air was thick with anticipation. The patrons weren't laughing now. They were watching, waiting, holding their breath to see what would happen next. This was no longer about a homeless man asking for a handout. It was a scene charged with unspoken questions, and everyone in the daily grind knew they were on the verge of witnessing something significant. The stage was set, not for another round of humiliation, but for a reckoning. Mr. Peterson didn't wait for Arthur's response. He walked behind the counter, poured a rich, dark coffee into a ceramic mug, not a paper cup, and placed it gently on the table in front of Arthur. He then added a warm blueberry scone on a small plate, along with a napkin and silverware. The simple act was a powerful statement. It was a gesture of dignity, a clear and deliberate reversal of the cruelty Arthur had previously endured. Arthur stared at the offering, his hands trembling as he reached for the warm mug. The feeling of the smooth ceramic against his cold fingers was a small but profound comfort, a forgotten sensation from a life he thought was lost forever. He took a slow sip of the coffee, the warmth spreading through his chest, and for a moment, he closed his eyes. The cafe had fallen completely silent. The only sounds were the soft hum of the refrigerators and the quiet clink of Arthur's spoon against his mug. Every customer was now an audience member, their conversations abandoned, their attention fully captured by the unfolding drama. Jessica stood frozen behind the counter, her usual cynical confidence replaced by a growing, visible dread. She watched her boss, her expression a cocktail of confusion and fear. Mr. Peterson cleared his throat, and his voice, though calm, resonated with an authority that commanded the entire room. "A couple of days ago," he began, his gaze sweeping across the faces of his customers, "something happened in this cafe that I am not proud of. We all witnessed a man being treated with disrespect. He was mocked for his appearance and for asking for a simple piece of bread." He let the words hang in the air, forcing everyone to confront their own complicity. He saw some customers shift in their seats, their faces flushed with dawning shame. "I, like many of you, made a judgment," Mr. Peterson continued. "I saw a homeless man. I didn't see the person, and for that, I was wrong. We were all wrong." He then turned his gaze toward Arthur, his voice softening with respect. "This man's name is Arthur. What none of us knew is that for over 20 years, he was known as Dr. Arthur Pendleton, one of the most brilliant and beloved literature professors at Harvard University." A collective audible gasp swept through the room. It was a shocking revelation, a twist that no one could have anticipated. He held up his phone, displaying the old news article with Dr. Pendleton's photo for all to see. He is a man who has published books, inspired thousands of students, and dedicated his life to knowledge. He is also a man who suffered a tragedy so profound it would break any one of us. With a heavy heart, he briefly recounted the story of the accident, the loss of Arthur's wife and daughter. So when you see this man, you are not seeing a beggar. You are seeing a scholar, a husband, and a father shattered by grief. The impact of the revelation was immediate and devastating. The silence in the daily grind was no longer just quiet. It was heavy, thick with the weight of collective remorse. The truth had landed like a physical blow, knocking the air out of the room and leaving everyone exposed in their own prejudice. The group of college students who had applauded Jessica's cruelty now stared at their hands, their faces burning with a shame so intense it was almost painful to watch. One of them, a young man who had been particularly vocal, looked as if he might be sick. They hadn't just laughed at a homeless man. They had mocked a grieving father, a respected scholar whose life had been decimated by unimaginable pain. The entertainment they had found in his suffering now felt grotesque and unforgivable. Jessica, however, received the heaviest blow. Her face had gone deathly pale, her knuckles white as she gripped the edge of the counter for support. All the air of superiority, the cynical armor she wore every day, had been stripped away, leaving her utterly vulnerable. Her eyes darted towards Arthur, but she couldn't hold his gaze. The man she had so casually dehumanized, the thing she had deemed unworthy of even a fresh bagel, was a figure of immense tragedy and intellect. Her cruel words, "Don't you have any shame?" now echoed back at her, a damning indictment of her own character. A single tear traced a path down her cheek, a silent admission of her profound regret. Arthur, who had remained silent throughout the unveiling, finally looked up. His eyes were filled with tears, but his expression wasn't one of anger or vindication. It was one of deep, heartbreaking sorrow. He slowly got to his feet, and every person in the room leaned in, waiting for his words. His voice, when he spoke, was soft but carried to every corner of the silent cafe. "The value of a person," he began, his voice trembling slightly but gaining strength with each word, "is not measured by their job, or their bank account, or the clothes they wear. It is inherent. It is absolute." He looked directly at Jessica, but his gaze was not accusatory. It was filled with a sad, gentle wisdom. You don't need to know someone's story to treat them with respect. You just need to remember that they have one. His words were not a condemnation, but a lesson. A powerful, unforgettable lesson in humanity, delivered by a man who had lost everything but his own. The profound lesson delivered by Arthur hung in the air, transforming the atmosphere of the coffee shop into something akin to a sacred space. The customers, once a disconnected crowd of individuals, now seemed united by a shared sense of humility. A middle-aged man in a business suit who had laughed along with Jessica just days before slowly walked over to Arthur's table. "Sir," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "I am deeply sorry for my behavior. Your dignity in the face of our ignorance is a lesson I will never forget." One by one, others followed, offering quiet apologies, words of support, or simply a respectful nod. It was a slow, humbling procession of remorse. Moved by the scene, Mr. Peterson knew he couldn't let this moment end here. This wasn't just about correcting a past wrong. It was about building a better future. He waited until the last customer had spoken before approaching Arthur again. "Arthur," he said, his voice earnest, "what you said is the truest thing I've heard in a long time. This place, I could learn a lot from you." He took a deep breath before making the offer that had been forming in his mind since he discovered the truth. "I would be honored if you would consider working here, at the Daily Grind. Not just cleaning tables, but being a part of this place. Your presence here would be a constant reminder to all of us of what truly matters." The offer was stunning. Arthur looked at Mr. Peterson, his eyes wide with disbelief. A job. It was a word he hadn't dared to even hope for. For years, he had been invisible, a ghost haunting the periphery of society. Now someone was not only seeing him, but was offering him a place, a purpose. Tears welled up in his eyes again. But this time, they were not tears of sorrow. They were tears of overwhelming gratitude. At that moment, Jessica finally found the courage to move. She walked slowly from behind the counter, her face streaked with tears, and stopped in front of Arthur. I am so sorry," she whispered, her voice cracking. "There is no excuse for how I treated you. It was cruel and unforgivable." Arthur looked at her, and in his gaze, she didn't find the condemnation she expected. Instead, she saw a profound, weary empathy. "Forgiveness," Arthur said softly, "is also a new beginning. Let yours start now." His words of grace, offered when he had every right to be bitter, were the final transformative piece of the morning's reckoning. Arthur accepted the offer. The following Monday, he arrived at the daily grind, not as a beggar, but as an employee. Mr. Peterson had provided him with new clothes and a place to stay in a small apartment above the shop. When he walked in wearing a clean apron, his beard neatly trimmed, he looked like a different man. Yet, the same wise, gentle eyes remained. His presence behind the counter, organizing pastries or pouring coffee, became a quiet but powerful symbol of the cafe's transformation. Customers who had witnessed the story unfold now came in not just for their caffeine fix, but to exchange a few words with him. They discovered that he was a man of quiet humor and immense knowledge, capable of quoting classic poetry or offering a piece of profound advice with equal ease. His relationship with Jessica was rebuilt on a foundation of mutual respect. He became her mentor, not just in work, but in life. He taught her about literature, about history, and most importantly, about empathy. She, in turn, helped him navigate the small challenges of re-entering the world, from using a new payment system to remembering the names of the regulars. The coffee shop thrived. It became known throughout Boston as the place with the professor, a spot where a cup of coffee came with a lesson in humanity. Mr. Peterson often found himself simply watching Arthur interact with people, his heart filled with a deep sense of pride. He had offered a man a job, but in return, Arthur had given his business a soul. One crisp evening, as he was wiping down the last table, Arthur paused and looked out the window at the bustling city lights. He no longer felt like a ghost in this city. He had a purpose. He had colleagues who had become his friends, his new family. He hadn't recovered what he had lost. The pain of losing his wife and daughter would always be a part of him, but he had found a way to build something new from the ashes of his grief. He had taken the first, most difficult step. And as we leave Arthur, beginning his new chapter, we're left with a powerful question. What would you have done in that coffee shop? Would you have been a bystander, a participant, or would you have been the one to show compassion? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. Every story like this is a chance for us to grow. If Arthur's journey moved you, please share this video with someone who needs to hear it. And make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss another story that matters. Because in the end, we are all authors of our own lives, but we are also characters in the stories of everyone we meet. Let's make sure we play a kind part.